All right. If you remember the beginning of the course, we discussed the idea of visual encoding. When we do a data visualization, simply what we do is to map data onto spatial properties. So we begin with a series of, for instance, series of percentages or series of numbers of other kinds, etc. And then we can represent them using the length or the height of an object or the position of different objects or the areas, different sizes of different objects, angles, line weights, shades of color, etc. Each one of those is called either a method of representation or a visual encoding. And they can lead to graphic forms, such as the bar graph or the line chart, and the tree map, for example. This is called a tree map, etc. Right? So this is the whole idea behind data visualization, the idea of visual encoding. This is going to be very, very important in the lesson this week because I'm going to expand on this idea to explain when it is appropriate to use each one of these methods of encoding, or at least give you some ideas on how to better choose the most appropriate graphic form or method of encoding depending on your goals. There are several websites that can help you with this goal. For instance, the datavizcatalog.com or Anne K. Amery's Essentials. Both of them are linked from this slide over here. Both of them are very similar. They are literally catalogs of data visualization forms or different graphic forms. So each one of these icons that you have on the screen right now is a button, and the same thing with in Anne's website. So if you click on any of them, that will lead you to a short article explaining how to use a scatter plot or how to use a chord diagram, how to use a choropleth map, how to use a flow map, right? So these two websites are quite useful, very, very useful actually. But they're not the only tools that I use myself to guide my own decisions. And the reason is that as any kind of advice that you receive, you need to take it with a grain of salt. And that includes my own advice. Any advice should be taken with a little bit of a grain of salt because both of these websites include graphic forms that are considered either dubious or ineffective. For instance, the donut chart, unless that it only has two portions, it's not a very advisable graphic form to use. Or the radial bar chart. I mean, if you're going to do a bar chart, why are you going to make it radial, right? Just do a regular damn bar chart, which is easy to read and effective and useful, right? So even if these two websites are fantastic, there's always exceptions, I believe, in any advice. Another piece of information that you can use to guide your own decisions is this wonderful poster that was created by the graphics team at the Financial Times. So it's called the Visual Vocabulary, and you can find it on in the website ft.com/vocabulary. There's also a GitHub a repository in which you can from which you can download it. And this is very similar to the previous websites. This is a catalog of graphics of different visualization forms with a short description of when it is appropriate to use each one of them. But as I said before, these catalogs, the problem that they have is that they indirectly or implicitly, they convey the idea that for each single message or for each single story, for each single purpose, there is a single graphic form that is appropriate. And that may not be true in many circumstances, in most circumstances actually. There may be more than one graphic form. There may be two, three graphic forms that are equally effective to present the data. So those are not just the only tools that I use to choose graphic forms. I actually follow a process in which I ask myself the following questions when I'm going to encode data using data visualization. The first question that I ask myself is who the audience is, right? So who am I talking with, right? Who is this graphic for, right? What kind of publication I am working for? The example that I usually use is that it's not the same to create a graphic for The Economist magazine than doing the same graphic for the local newspaper. Just because the audience of the Economist magazine is probably made of people who are very used to seeing graphics related to businesses and related to financial issues, etc. So there are certain graphic forms, for example, the scatter plot and time series charts with error bars, etc., that are very common in that kind of industry. Therefore, that's a graphic form that you can use with no danger of misleading people, because you can assume that most people reading that magazine will be able to interpret that data correctly or that chart correctly. But if you're going to do the same graphic for the local newspaper, you may still use the scatter plot, which is not that usual in local newspapers, but you better include some sort of explanation of how to read the scatter plot, because it's likely to be much more unusual for the average reader of those publications. So we should not refrain from using unusual graphic forms, but we should include explainers. The second point is the most important one, I believe, the most important one among the three. Every visualization should be created with a purpose in mind, meaning you need to ask yourself, what is it that I want people to do with my graphic? What are the patterns and trends that I want to highlight, that I want people to see? Remember that one of the ideas behind both my books, The Truthful Art and The Functional Art, is that certainly a visualization can be and should be beautiful. It should be a beautiful picture. It should be attractive. But one of the main goals of a data visualization is also to emphasize and highlight patterns and trends and to make them visible, right? And we should think about visualizations as extensions of our own perception and of our own cognition. Therefore, the graphic forms that we choose should be chosen in a way that they enable those kinds of tasks. Meaning, do we want people to compare? Do we want people to see patterns? Geographic patterns, for example, that this is a very common example that I put. So if you want people to compare, you would better do something like a bar graph, for example, or rank things, right? If you want to rank things, perhaps you need a table or a bar graph. But if you want to do something that highlights geographic patterns, you better do a data map, not a bar graph, and vice versa. Vice versa is also true. If you want to rank data, don't use a map, use a bar graph or a table, right? And the third point is important as well. Can you understand the visualization without reading every single figure in the visualization? Okay, so let's try to expand on these three ideas.